You are listening to Entirely Tires, a Keep Canada Weird podcast special event.
Handsome Aaron Airport, you get your way tonight, buddy. This is your show.
I fought, I clawed, I did everything in my power to make this happen, and God willing, we are here. We are finally doing an episode entirely devoted to tires, entitled Entirely Tires.
Yeah, and it was an act of divine intervention. And it wasn't just divine intervention of my life and your life. The listeners all were taken over by this as well. As you'll see when we go through the episode tonight, the entire Keep Canada Weird army pitched in to share with us the best tire stories that they could come up with. I never would have thought there was a time that I was releasing an episode of the podcast, Entirely Tires. But here we are, and I dare say this is going to be a really good one. We got some great stories tonight, all involving tires.
Oh, they better all involve tires. If you sneak in a missing person or some kind of an animal story into this, I am quitting.
Well, I want to start, just like we always do, I want to start with a voicemail, and maybe this will set a bit of boundaries about what we're going to do tonight. Because I did get... It's not a piece of hate mail. It's a piece of criticism mail, or maybe kind of a condescending question mail about our most recent episode. On the most recent weekly weird news roundup of Keep Canada Weird, we played a voicemail of a tire story that came from the United States. A listener named Adam had this to say. The subject of his email was, and keep in mind, a human being took the time to write this to a podcast, which alone is great comedy. The subject is, are you really keeping Canada weird? And what Adam says is, my wife and I were listening to the latest episode of Keep Canada Weird, and I just don't quite understand why the last tire story was from the States. It wasn't that weird, and that's not even Canadian. Imagine taking the time to write that.
Imagine something so trivial bothered you enough that you're like, I have to say something.
I got to email this guy.
I can't let this slide.
But I want to defend ourselves, myself, yourself, and the entire, and everyone taking part in this. Tire stories transcend geographical boundaries. There's not an American tire story or a Canadian tire story or a Swiss tire story. These are human tire stories. And I think here on Keep Canada Weird, that's what we're interested in. The human element of these tire stories. What can be revealed about humanity by way of tire stories. They're all Canadian.
Not to mention that we are on the verge of becoming the 51st state.
Oh, don't go there.
So therefore, we are all the same country. Therefore, we must entertain tire stories from all over North America now.
Okay. Well, let's get started here. Before we get to the tire stories, do you want to hear a Canadian tire fact?
Yeah, this isn't sponsored by Canadian Tire, is it?
No, I mean like tire facts related to Canada in some way.
I know what you mean, but you're saying Canadian Tire about 9 times so far this episode.
Oh, it's good. Yeah, it's going to keep happening.
Yeah, it is probably.
Here's a tire fact coming out of Canada. Aaron, did you know that winter tires are mandatory in some provinces?
I assumed that they were, but I didn't know the exact physics or laws behind it.
Yeah, they're required in some provinces, either required to be worn or restrictions on when you put them on or what type of winter tire, winter versus all season or whatnot. But I don't think the government needs to tell me when to put the winter tires on. As a Canadian who gets a lot of snow in and around where I drive, I couldn't imagine driving without winter tires. And what I mean by that, for people listening from other parts of the world, so you have what you would call a summer tire or a rain tire. That's a typical, your kind of run-of-the-mill tire that you would use that's made for driving on like the road or a wet road. Then you have what's called all-season tires, or some people call them mud-snow tires. And they are tires that are good for driving in rain, a little bit of mud, and maybe a little bit of snow. But the thing about all-season tires is they don't really do great in anything, I find. And then you have snow tires, which are tires specifically made for driving in snow. They have bigger kind of grooves, so your tires kind of lock into the snow better. And I think they're made of a different type of rubber that maybe stays soft as it gets cold, so it gives you better traction. But I think I started that explanation by asking you, do you use winter tires?
Of course I use winter tires. When I first started driving, when I bought my first car, I went about 2 winters with all season tires, and I'll never go back because I got into an accident
Oh,
and wrapped my car around a pole. And I had all season tires
mm,
on, and they did absolutely nothing to prevent me from skidding out and sliding into this pole. So
yeah.
ever since then, I've had winter tires on every winter.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people do that. What I do is I have all seasons on year round, but then in the winter, like usually after Christmas or maybe just before Christmas, I'll put on my winter tires and I'll have them until the snow is gone for the most part. So that's an interesting tire fact about Canada. Some provinces, I think the ones that come to mind in my research were Quebec, British Columbia, and some parts of Ontario require winter tires. That's your interesting tire fact.
So you can get a fine for
Yeah.
not having winter tires on in the
Yeah.
winter.
Actually, I said Ontario. I don't think Ontario is one. But in Quebec and BC, you need to have winter tires from the 1st of December to the 15th of March. And yeah, you'll get a fine if you
Oh,
don't.
that's interesting because I mean, certainly in Nova Scotia, there are usually a handful of winter storms that land late March, early April. So,
Mhm. Yeah, there's always one. Let's lighten the mood with a tire story. You ready to get into our first of the night?
yes, I'm ready. Big time.
Let's go to Coquitlam, BC. We're going to hear from Carissa, a listener who did tree planting in the past. And in the course of her occupation as a tree planter, she lived to tell a great tire story. Here it comes.
Hi there. This message is for the Keep Canada Weird podcast. This is Sharissa, your correspondent from Coquitlam, British Columbia, and I've got a tire story for you. Years ago, I was tree planting outside of Quesnel, BC, and we were heading to our plot on a decommissioned logging road. It had been raining for days, so the ruts that the tires left were almost a foot deep, and I was in the front of the 2 trucks. We were spaced out quite a bit because the trucks were bouncing back and forth in the mud in between the trees, when suddenly I saw a wheel rolling down the track in front of us. And for a second, I wondered where it had come from. But at that point, our truck, front passenger side, keeled into the ground and we slid to a halt. The entire wheel had separated from the truck. And with all the mud, the nuts were nowhere to be found. And anyway, even if we could find them, the ground was too soft to jack up the truck and get it back on. The truck behind us stopped, but couldn't turn around because the trees were too narrow and the mud kept it from being able to back down the road. So all of us had to get out of the trucks, grab our gear, and walk the long way back out down the muddied road to the gravel. And it took an off-road tow truck 4 days to get those trucks back to our camp.
That sounds like a job I could never do.
Tree planting?
Well, the tree planting, if you're walking around in a field, like cutting little holes, putting trees in the ground, that part sounds easy. But she described like this harrowing tale of driving. It sounded like, remember there was that show like Ice Road Truckers?
Yeah, yeah.
It sounded like she was describing something like that. They're driving down this narrow road where the trucks can't stop or turn around. The mud is so like thick that your tires are like a foot into the ground. Somehow in the course of this, the truck she's in, tire goes flying off and you're just stuck there and to your own devices in the middle of the forest in BC.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that.
Yeah, I know how.
I'm too soft for that.
Yeah, me too. No, even tree planting is a lot harder than I think you think it is.
On your back or
on your entire body. It's very physically demanding because the amount of trees that they're planting and you're bending over and you're putting trees in like at rapid fire, rapid pace, very physically demanding. There's a few tree planters that I follow on TikTok that they kind of talk about their day-to-day life, and it's pretty intense. But I know how dangerous ruts in the road can be too, because even on paved roads, like our highways here in Cape Breton, they're really bad and infamous for having ruts in the pavement. So when it rains, when you get a heavy rain, those ruts fill up with water, and then you can easily hydroplane over them if you're going too fast and lose control of your vehicle.
Oh, many people have lost their lives hydroplaning, which is like a surprisingly dangerous thing, like just hitting a patch of water at the right speed, at the right kind of tire, and all of a sudden you might as well be on a sheet of ice on in your vehicle. But her story there, it's was it more of a wheel story or a tire story? And should we draw that distinction? Because it's not like she got a flat tire or her tire came off. The entire wheel separated from her truck.
Yeah, but I
Is that
feel it's fair because wheels and tires, it's such a
Mhm.
fine line that we're walking there if
Okay?
we're going to ask listeners to censor wheel stories as opposed
Yeah, to
to
tire
tire
stars.
stories.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think
Well,
as long as it's circular and is involved in transporting a vehicle, I think it's fair.
okay. So we're not cool with tracks, right? Like a tank would have. Although, I think her truck doing this tree planting, driving up through those rural logging roads or whatever it was she was on, tracks like a tank probably would have been a good thing to have on. Driving through mud like
You
that.
mean just driving a tank in general up there? Is that what you mean? Yeah, take a
Maybe a
tank
good
to your
idea.
to trank take a tank to your plot. When you're tree
Mm.
planting.
I'm glad you ruled that wheel tires are in because that's not the only wheel fell off story we're going to hear tonight. Before we get to the next story, though, can I tell you another interesting tire fact?
Do I have a choice?
Yeah, I could do it after the
No,
next
I want to
voicemail.
hear it now.
You want to hear
Yeah.
it? This kind of piggybacks off of the last tire fact that I gave you about winter tires being required in some provinces. Did you know that studs in your tires are actually quite controversial? Some provinces will not allow you to stud your tires.
Yeah, I knew that definitely. I didn't know provinces, but there are certainly places like certain parking lots. Like there's this one hotel in Halifax where they have those underground parking lots. If
Mm.
you have a hotel room at that hotel, you're not allowed to park your car in their parking lot if you have studded tires.
Mhm. And also for people who are unfamiliar, studded tires is like you take your winter tire, like your snow tires or whatever you want to call them, and they put metal, like kind of like little metal spikes into your tire. So that way, as you drive, I put them on my car. I have a four-wheel drive SUV with winter studded tires. And as you drive, if there's not snow on the ground, you can almost hear like the little click of the little pieces of metal rolling around. But the point of that is if you're driving on like packed snow or ice, you could still get traction because you got the little pieces of metal sticking out of your tires. But some areas in Canada ban them. A lot of Ontario actually has a ban on studded tires, and the reason for that is due to the damage it does to the roads, or as you just described, to the underground parking lot of this hotel. It kicks the butt of the roads that they're driving on if there isn't snow or ice on them. And so a lot of provinces or some provinces will ban them outright or restrict them to only be able to be used during certain times of the year. So it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But again, as someone in Nova Scotia who drives in some nasty roads, myself, who's who I'm speaking of, I love having studded tires. It makes such a difference on a bad day.
I've never had studded tires.
Oh,
I've never driven with studded tires on.
I'll never go back. Halifax is a city that has a lot of hills. And so if you're driving up a hill and it's an icy day, it's like it can be a nightmare. But so I'll like on the worst day of the year, where there's, cars just like sliding around and spinning their wheels and not going anywhere, I drive past them like there's no problem in the world. And there isn't, because my tires have been studded by God himself.
Yeah, you must really feel like you're above the law when you're driving around in your studded tires.
Yeah, I absolutely do. Speaking of tires, you ready for another story?
Let's hear it.
Here's a good one. Here's Lori's life and death tire story. I know that's pretty much our favorite type of tire stories, one that involves the almost loss of life. This one comes from California, so I'm going to apologize in advance to Adam, who only wants Canadian tire stories. Unfortunately for you, Adam, they're all Canadian tire stories. Here comes a life and death story.
Hello, Jordan and Aaron. This is Lori. I'm also calling from Tucson, Arizona. When I was only 2 years old, I lived by the beach, and there was a long ramp that we would walk down to get to the beach from the road that was up at the top of the cliffs. Some boys let go of a truck tire at the top of the ramp, And somewhere closer to the bottom of the ramp, after the tire had picked up enough speed, it completely ran me over. And didn't kill me, obviously, but my mom sure thought that it had. And I walked away with just a bunch of scars. Love your show. Bye-bye.
So those boys were like inches away from being murderers. I can almost imagine the situation where this group of teenagers are like, we should push this tire down this hill. And then they push it, and then all of a sudden they see it gaining speed and kind of bouncing, and they're like, oh shit.
Oh, that escalated.
Yeah. Do we run or do we put our hands behind our back? And then as the tire's barreling down this hill, 2-year-old Lori walks out and gets smoked. She is lucky to be alive.
Yeah, and I imagine there's a lot of emotional scarring involved as well, not to mention the physical scarring she suffered in the moment, but emotionally, has she developed a fear of tires, I wonder? Is she always leery of tires? Whenever she's in a parking lot, she's worried she's going to get hit by a tire. Does she have tire nightmares?
I think it was merciful that she was 2. There's probably a part of her brain wasn't developed to the point to form like this lifelong fear. But then again, I think if you were attacked by a dog when you were 2, you'd still be like have this kind of fear of dogs, or more likely to have like a fear of dogs or something. But she seemed like, in telling that story, it didn't seem like she was uncomfortable talking about tires.
No, but we didn't see her personally. She could have been visibly shaking.
She's sitting in a chair and her partner's holding her hand. Like, just tell them what happened with the tires.
I think her psychiatrist was sitting on the other end of the couch and being like, just leave the voicemail. You have to face your fears. Tell the Canadian podcasters about how you were almost killed by a tire.
So, Aaron, I've given you some interesting and surprising and informative tire facts. But did you know there's actually some really fascinating tire-related stories in Canadian history?
I assumed there were, but I don't have any off the top of my head. So why don't you give me one?
I got one. Have you ever heard about the 1990 Hagersville tire fire? I had never heard of this until today, doing a bit of research on interesting Canadian tire stories. And I stumbled upon the 1990 Hagersville tire fire, which in fact is one of the world's largest tire fires. I'll tell you a bit about it. The Hagersville tire fire began on February 12th of 1990 near, of course, Hagersville, Ontario. Sparked by arson, the fire burned through approximately 14 million tires stored at a landfill site and lasted for 17 days. The incident caused significant environmental and health concerns, prompted evacuations and extensive firefighting efforts, and became a turning point for Canada, leading to stricter regulations around tire storage and recycling procedures to prevent future disasters, such as the 1990 Hagersville tire fire.
For years, millions of used automobile tires, as many as 15 million, have piled up on a tract of land south of Hamilton, Ontario. The experts warned they might catch fire. Today, they did. Black, dirty smoke is spiraling hundreds of meters into the sky, and the smell of burning rubber is hanging in the air. The authorities have been after the owner of the recycling operation to clean up the site for 3 years. He was ordered to divide the tires into smaller piles with fire lanes in between and to build a water reservoir in case of fire. But the owner appealed that order to an environmental board, and that's where the legal argument stood when today's fire broke out.
The amount of toxic gas that comes off of that is like, man,
how does he have so many tires though, even for a dump? Like, millions of tires?
14 million. Like, you do yourself a favor later on before you go to bed tonight and just Google the 1990 Hagersville fire and look at the pile of tires. It doesn't even seem like this, it doesn't seem possible that there would be this many tires piled in one spot. It's a literal mountain of them that's burning, and it's thick black smoke coming off of these things.
I find that so hard to believe that.
Are you calling me a liar?
One dump would have.
Are you saying it's AI?
I'm just dancing around it. I'm not flat out calling you a liar. No, I'm just shocked at that amount of tires
Yeah.
in one place.
Well, it happened.
But the demands that they made to him leading up to this fire, where like you have to have separate piles of these tires and there has to be running water going by them at all times, and that seems a little unrealistic to me, because especially if you've got 14 million tires and you're going to put them in all these little bundles around, separated by so many feet, like he's not going to have the real estate to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure he was like, "Do you see how many tires I have? Like, I'm way over my head here."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
It's well, they all burned. I guess that was what came of it, and now, as I said in my little description, there is it led to big changes in the regulations surrounding like getting rid of used tires. But
Yeah.
let's hear a tire story that maybe some good came out of, but it depends. Like if you consider like a divorce and a fresh start, the breakdown of a marriage, a good thing or a bad thing. I guess this tire story, let's just say it ended in interesting but life-changing ways because it ends in the breakdown of a marriage. Here comes Diane's story.
Hello, Jordan, Bus Stop Bonaparte, and Handsome Marin Airport. My name is Diane, and I'm from Oshawa, Ontario. I heard your call for tire stories for your all-tire episode, and I have one I'd like to share with you. I'm a single mom to 3 kids, and when I was pregnant a few years ago with my second child, I found myself at a local tire shop to get some new winter tires. This was in my first trimester of my pregnancy, and as I was sitting in that little waiting room they have, I found the scent of the tires to just be overwhelming. I don't know if you two know a lot about this, but the smells in your first trimester are terrible. Everything smells disgusting. But that overwhelming smell of tires, it was the worst thing. I couldn't get outside and wait because it was early December and the weather was bad. And I just had to sit there surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of tires, and the scent just like infected my whole body. It was terrible. And I thought that was the worst of it. But then I got pregnant with my third child, and it was at the same time of year, and I ended up in the exact same situation a second time. You might ask yourself, why didn't I have my partner go to the tire store when I knew how bad it was? And well, like I said, I'm single now. Did tires destroy our relationship? Maybe. Anyhow, I still can't stand the smell of tires. Thanks for giving me a platform to talk about it, and keep keeping it weird.
What kind of guy sends his pregnant wife out to get the tires swapped on the car? Come on.
I can't speak to this individual's character, but I can certainly sympathize with it's glad that she was given a platform. This is one of the things that we talked about as we realized that there were so many tire stories out there that people really needed a place to be comfortable to vent their tire story, and to something that's been bothering them for years and years, and they felt that they've had nowhere to turn, nobody to talk to about this. And now there's a whole community of tire people out there with tire stories.
And the one thing we all have in common, it seems like no one knows anything about tires that has taken part in our discussion yet. Except maybe the earlier in the episode, we heard Carissa, the tree planter. She seemed to know a little more than the rest of us about tires because she's like, the ground was too soft to like jack up the truck. That's at least some basic knowledge of tires. But so far, I don't know if anyone that has spoke on this topic really knows much about tires.
No, including you and I. We probably know the
Yes.
least about tires than anybody involved in this tire episode. So, but we're learning. We're learning as we go, and we're all learning together. This is really like group therapy is what it is.
Yeah, I think one thing we just learned from Diane is if you're going to send your pregnant spouse out to get the tires changed, you're rolling the dice. If you want to keep her, deal with the tire swap over each year.
Yeah, at least the second time, once you know that the smell of the tires had bothered her so much the first time, then volunteer to go this time.
They do smell. I know what she's talking about.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
when she was describing it, I could almost hear her being like, oh, like she was about to start gagging, thinking about the tire smell. That would have been a really good touch in the voicemail if she made
Yeah,
that
I can
sound.
just imagine the workers in that, in that body shop or wherever she was, whatever auto place it was, and the receptionist is sitting there and she's there in a chair, pregnant, going,
Just like sweating bullets because she's
yeah,
like
and
her
the
body's
receptionist
just
is just
holding on.
like, not again,
Another pregnant
not
lady
again.
here.
I know I'm
You
not
must be in your
delivering another child on my watch.
Let's get into another one. This is Katrina from Kitchener's story. I had teased that we would hear more than one tire falling off story tonight. This is a really good tire falling off story. I'll let Katrina take it away.
Hi, Jordan. Hi, Erin. It's Katrina calling from Kitchener. Longtime listener of the show. Absolutely love it. And I just wanted to call in. Hopefully, I'm not too late. I have a tire story for you, Erin. So, this happened, I want to say about 3 years ago. It was during the pandemic. And we had taken our family van in for servicing across town. And when it was time to pick it up, the family of four, we had two boys aged about 7 and 9 at the time. So we had to load everybody into the car, drive across town to go pick up the van and drop my husband off at the tire place to pay and bring the vehicle home again. And I had a work call to get back home for. So I'm, trying to pull quickly out of the driveway onto a pretty busy several lane street in Kitchener. And as I'm pulling out, there's a big thud. And I realize that I've hit the curb. And this curb is, it's pretty high and it's kind of square and it's kind of sticking out all weird. And I'd forgotten about it in my rush to get home. But, the vehicle seems to be handling okay. And the kids are in the back seat screaming at me because they're like, "What was that, Mom?" And I'm like, "It's fine." And this is like a multi-lane highway. I want to say it's like 3 or 4 lanes. I make my way over to the fast lane. And then all of a sudden, the car starts to make a funny noise. And then it starts to feel wobbly. And then it starts to smell like burning rubber. And I can see blue smoke coming out our back end. This is not good. The kids are freaking out in the back seat. And I can see that there's a vehicle in the lane next to me. And they look like they're trying to either flag me down or kind of drive alongside because they can see something's happening. So I quickly put on my 4-way flashers and I start working myself lane by lane over to the shoulder. And then I realize that we're coming up to the exit where everybody would take if you're going on the 401. So I'm realizing I can't get stuck. I have to get over to the side, slow down and get over to the side before this exit hits. So I'm doing my darndest to get over there calmly and safely. And then all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see a tire rolling alongside me on my right, on my passenger side, passing me, going down the side of the road as I'm pulling onto the curb. My own tire passed me on the right, and it went, I want to say, maybe 100 meters down the side of the expressway. And then it did this little circle around in a circle, and then poof, fell, and this cloud of dust comes up when it fell. My husband's coming down the expressway behind me. He saw the whole thing. He pulls over and rescues us. But the kids told me that they were never going to drive with me again after this incident. But yeah, that's my tire story. So maybe just do yourself a favor if this ever happens to you and just pull over and check stuff right away. All right, have a great show, guys, and I look forward to hearing some more tire stories. Bye-bye.
Does she really? And you know what? I can't wait to hear more tire stories.
That was a good one, though. I was
That was a
surprised with
great
that.
tire story. Yes, it was like out of a movie or something. Like
Especially the tire as it kind of wobbled and then fell into
yeah,
itself. I can
yeah,
picture, I could hear it as she was describing it.
yeah. She
And
painted the picture very well.
I enjoyed that. And that was two good tire stories involving motherhood.
Yeah, and also in involving marriage as well. In this situation, the marriage stays together because the husband was right behind her and was
He
able
swooped in.
to swoop in and save the day and help out his family. Whereas in our other story, you have the pregnant woman who's vomiting at the dealership from the smell of tires, who's completely abandoned by her husband.
And she left him in good form.
Yeah, well, we don't know all the details, but
We should
certainly
get
we
his
can
side of it, but
certainly we can paint in those shadowy parts with our own little details.
so we're just about at the end of it here, Aaron. So we're going to start wrapping it up. But everything we heard tonight are the tire stories that came in the last day since the release of our most recent Weird News Roundup. Are you surprised that this kind of feedback is coming and this kind of participation is coming out of the topic of tire stories?
I'm not surprised. And my heart told me that there were others out there that have tire stories that are some traumatic, some are funny, some are interesting, but
Some are near death.
some are near death. It's the whole gambit of emotions that come along with seeing and owning and knowing about tires. And there's no other podcast on earth that is covering tires as much as we are right now.
No. Between like we have the market cornered on Robin's Donuts, criticism and critique and celebration and culture. We have the market cornered on Robin's Donuts culture and now on tires. But tires not from there's probably like a mechanic podcast. This is different. This is like a culture and society podcast about tires.
But I bet you the mechanic podcast doesn't focus as much specifically on tires as
the
we
rubber
are
meeting
in
the-
one pound for pound session, right? So whereas
Yeah.
a mechanics podcast would talk about tires every now and then, and if you were to add all of their tire stories up together over the lifetime of their podcast, sure, they probably have more tire stories than we do, but we've dedicated now one entire episode to just talking about tires.
But that's good though, because this, I think for us in terms of our show and keeping Canada weird, this is a great kind of cherry on top for the narrative that built out of a request for tire stories. So I'm impressed by this and I'm very happy with how it came out. Before we wrap it up though, I'm going to read one email I got. I always prefer listener comments to come in the form of a voicemail, but this one ends with a compliment, so I'm going to read it. It's from Suzanne, and the subject of her email was Deadly Tires and an Aptly Named Business. In 2014, my husband picked up his new car from the dealership, which required winter tires on it before it left the lot. After the job was done, he drove away. Instead of driving on Deerfoot Trail, a major highway here, he headed to Memorial Drive. 4 minutes into his ride, his car began to wobble badly, and it was apparent an issue had arisen in his front right tire. He came to a stop, and the tire suddenly came off and rolled flat onto the ground, leaving him on only 3 tires. Had he gone on another road, there's a good chance he'd had ended up 6 feet under, and or another driver would be at grave risk. The dealership claimed torque specs had changed, but we suspect the real issue was the failure to tighten the lug nuts. Thanks, Jordan and Aaron, for all your stellar entertainment, making me laugh out loud and making me seem drunk, high, or mentally unstable while I walk my dog. So the actual tire story in there was very similar to other ones we heard. Tires falling off. I guess that happens.
Yeah, it's starting to make me a little nervous now because whenever I would leave the dealership, like after getting my winter tires on or my summer tires back on, I always just assumed that they're good to go. But now I'm hearing all these stories of people leaving a dealership or a body shop after just having their tires put on and then having one of them fall off just after they leave the dealership. So,
yeah, I guess if we do another Entirely Tires episode, we'll try to figure out why this is happening and explain it to people. But
Well,
until then,
we could be uncovering a brand new conspiracy here.
yeah, I wonder
On
if
entirely
mechanics know this is
tires.
happening. I wonder if
The
mechanics know this is happening.
Yeah, you have the animal uprising. This is the mechanic uprising.
They're just keeping your tires loose, and why though?
Yeah,
Why
and
would they do
intentionally
this?
loosening our tires and then having us. I don't know. We're just starting to
Yeah,
notice
that's
this,
right.
so we have a lot of research and a lot more
Okay, we're gonna watch it.
dissecting to do. Yeah, we do. So now we've got animals coming at us from this direction, teenagers coming at us from that direction, and now mechanics coming at us from over here. So we have to be very careful. Um, I don't know which direction to even turn anymore because there's a group coming after us every way we look.
Yikes. Well, let's put a bow on our our Keep Canada Weird presents Entirely Tires special. This was fun.
It was fun.
I want to thank you for helping Aaron and I fulfill our mission to keep Canada weird. If you've got a news story from your area that you'd like to share with us, or have any thoughts or theories or opinions on anything we discussed tonight, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact us by using the voice recorder that can be found at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. And on that topic, I want to give a big thank you to this episode's correspondents. If your voice message was aired tonight, you can email me your address. My email is nighttimepodcast@gmail.com, and I'll get a Keep Canada Weird badge and swag pack sent out to you. I just ask that you wear the badge proudly and responsibly. Next, a big thanks goes out to Aaron for another great night, Nicole for the intro and outro voiceovers, and Monty Data for the outro version of O Canada. And then, of course, a sincere and massive thank you goes out to each and every one of you listening. Your support makes this show possible. And if you'd like to support the show even more, please consider a subscription to the premium feed, which can be found at nighttimepodcast.com/subscribe. The premium feed costs just a couple dollars a month, but that money will fund the creation of new episodes of the show, and it'll give you those episodes 2 days early, ad-free, and access to a back catalog of episodes. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the show by sharing this episode on social media. That helps a lot too, and it's free. Your support is very much appreciated. So with all that said, until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and together, let's keep Canada weird.
Keep Canada Weird is written, hosted, and produced by the Nighttime Podcast.
And now to our viewers and listeners everywhere. Good night.
This is Kelsey calling from Tacoma, Washington, your Washington correspondent. And earlier this year, I ended up having a nail in my tire. I took it to a certain auto repair shop. I don't want to call out this corporation because I do truly love them, but their tire centers suck. Anyways, I took it to this corporation and they told me that they couldn't patch the hole in my tire as it was too large. So I said, fine, here's $800 to get a whole brand new set of tires for my car. I get the brand new tires installed, and the next morning I come out to a completely flat tire. To say that I was livid is an underestimation of how I was feeling. I then take my car to the tire shop again, and they then tell me and try to mansplain me about tires, even though I happen to know a lot about cars, that the tire pressure monitoring system in my car is what caused the tire to not seal properly and then go flat. And they proceeded to try to upsell me to brand new tire pressure sensors. I asked them kindly to remove the sensors that were causing the problem, and instead they snapped them, left them in my car, and I haven't had a problem with the tire since. Hope you enjoy my tire story. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.
Keep Canada Weird, boys. Love the podcast. Jason.